There was a study in 2011 in Sweden.
Yes. So the Swedish study is groundbreaking. This was a study where they asked 20 to 30,000 Swedish women about their habits in sunlight. And they divided these women into three categories: those women that did not get a lot of sun, those that got a moderate amount of sun, and those that got a lot of sun. And they followed them for 20 years. And they kept a track of each one that died and what they died of. And when they were done with that, they were astonished, because what they found was that the women who had spent the large amount of their time outside, or that spent the most amount of time outside, had the least amount of mortality from cancer, from cardiovascular disease, and non-cardiovascular disease. And those that spent the least amount of time outside had the highest levels of that. The magnitude difference between those two was so much that they were able to show that women who, in Sweden, who spent the most amount of time outside and smoked had the same mortality as those women that did not spend as much time outside and did not smoke.
They were equal.
They were equal. In other words, being in that category of not spending much time outside in the sun was the same risk factor for death as smoking.
How do they know it wasn't linked to exercise? How are they able to establish causation? Because that's
that's an excellent question. So the difference here as you go up is this is an association study. Okay, so the question is how can you get causation from association? You can't. But if you look at the Bradford Hill criteria, there is a way that you can potentially make a strong argument for causation if there's something called a dose-response curve. In other words, if you can show, you're not just comparing two things, but you're comparing three or more, if you can show that as you increase the variable, that there is a change in the outputs, that is strongly suggestive of potentially causation. By the way, this is exactly what we did to show that smoking causes lung cancer. Obviously, we can't do a randomized control trial. Here, you get to smoke, you don't get to smoke. We'll follow up in 20 years to see who has lung cancer. This is exactly what we did. We showed that there was such a strong association with cancer risk with smoking that we were able to say, through association, that smoking causes lung cancer. By the way, Richard Weller, who's a dermatologist in England, did just last year a very similar study as to the Swedish study, except it was 10 times bigger, and he did it with both men and women. He found the same results.